Imagine this. You're in a floating palace. Carpet so thick it feels like the ship is wearing slippers. The air smells like cigars, perfume, and confidence. Now imagine that palace begins to die, quietly, like someone opened a sink tap you can't turn off. They called her Unsinkable. Not officially, more like the way people call a champion unbeatable right before they get humbled. And then, in freezing darkness, the word unsinkable turns into something else. A mass grave, in water so cold it sits below the freezing point of fresh water. This story isn't about metal and rivets. It's about people, and the smallest decisions that decide who lives. The floating world that believed its own hype. The RMS Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a status symbol you could ride, a moving city designed to impress. Here's the dangerous part. The ship didn't need to be truly unsinkable, it just needed to feel unsinkable. Safe enough that nobody argues, nobody panics, nobody slows down. And this is where hubris gets sneaky. Hubris rarely walks into the room yelling, "I am hubris." Hubris wears a tuxedo. Hubris says, "Relax, we've done this 1,000 times." If pride were a beverage, that night it was served chilled. Unfortunately, the ocean took that personally. The human core, class. And now we reach the human core of the story, class. Titanic wasn't one society, it was multiple societies stacked vertically. Top decks, money, influence, space, information. Lower decks, families, immigrants, workers, people chasing a future so hard they could taste it. This matters because disasters don't hit equally. In emergencies, access becomes oxygen. Even before the iceberg, the ship was already telling a story. Some doors open easily, some doors don't. Warnings, speed, and the normal day illusion. And then come the warning signs, because history always sends warning signs. That day, the Atlantic wasn't quiet, it was talking. Ice warnings, messages, chatter, a growing sense the ocean ahead had teeth. And here's the painfully modern part. Information exists, but it doesn't automatically become action. In the U.S. Senate investigation record, there's a famous moment where an ICE message comes in, and the response is basically, "Shut up, I am busy." That's not villainy, that's human nature under load. It's the same logic we use today when we ignore the battery warning at 2%. I'll deal with it later. Except later is the North Atlantic. The Senate report also notes the ship was making about 21 knots before the collision. To be fair, many ships kept speed in ice seasons back then. And that's the problem. When a risky practice becomes normal, it stops feeling risky. Engineers call this normalization of deviance. You do something unsafe, nothing bad happens, so you start calling it safe. And then, at 11:40 p.m., the ocean cashes the invoice. The hit, the math, and the truth about unsinkable. The collision isn't dramatic. No explosion, no cinematic fireball. It's worse. It's quiet. A shiver through the hull, a scraping you feel in your bones. And then the real killer appears, math. According to Britannica, the ship could reportedly remain afloat if up to 4 watertight compartments were breached, but the damage affected at least 5. That's it. That's the moment the future collapses. Not because anyone screamed, because water doesn't negotiate. So Unsinkable wasn't a magical shield, it was a sales vibe built on an engineering feature with limits, and those limits got exceeded. The ship begins to tilt, the world rearranges itself, gravity becomes an enemy,
and people start making small decisions that become life and death. Do I leave my warm cabin or assume this is nothing? Do I wait for instructions or act now? Do I go up or stay where I'm told? And then, the lifeboats. Lifeboats, the cruelest symbol. Let's talk about the most haunting object in this disaster, a half-empty lifeboat. Because it means the space existed, the safety existed, but it didn't become reality. The U.S. Senate report states the ship had lifeboat capacity for about 1,176 people, yet about 706 were saved. That gap isn't just numbers. That gap is screaming. Imagine buying an umbrella the size of a football field and then sharing it with 5 people because you're not sure the handle is strong enough. Why were boats launched underfilled? Fear, confusion, training gaps, disbelief, and the social chaos of women and children first interpreted differently by different officers. And here comes the human core again, class. Reaching the boats, finding the right deck, the right staircase, the right moment was easier for some than others. Not every wealthy person lived, not every poor person died, but the disaster exposed the ship's invisible architecture. Privilege moves faster in a crisis. The cold, the final judge. And then comes the cold. Britannica notes the water that night was about 28 degrees F, -2 Celsius. So the ocean wasn't just water, it was a weapon. And this is where the story becomes unbearable. Many victims didn't die because they couldn't swim. They died because the human body can't bargain with that cold for long. Heroes, sacrifices, and human truth. And yet, inside this horror, people became breathtaking. Some gave up seats, some stayed behind with strangers, some held hands and lied gently. It's going to be okay, even when the truth was sharp. This is the part that always lands hardest. You don't truly know your character until the universe removes your comfort. Titanic wasn't just a shipwreck, it was a character test given to 2,200 people at once. The last minutes. History records the ship sank around 2:20 p.m., and when the lights go out, the world becomes a whisper and a scream. Rescue, delay, and the nearby ship problem. Distress calls go out, rockets flare, wireless messages fly. Britannica records the distress messaging, the chaotic hours, and the revised coordinates reported that night. The RMS Carpathia turns and races towards the scene after receiving the distress call, but it's a brutal distance, and the tragedy adds one more layer, a nearby ship that didn't arrive in time. And here we face the ugliest truth. A disaster isn't one failure. It's a stack of failures that align like planets. What Titanic changed forever? If Titanic had been just a tragedy, it would have been remembered as heartbreak. But Titanic became a turning point, because afterward, the world changed policy. The International Maritime Organization notes that the first version of SOLAS, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, was adopted in 1914 in response to Titanic, meaning the ocean forced governments to admit a simple truth. Safety rules written for yesterday's ships become tombstones on tomorrow's ships. Titanic basically filed the world's most expensive bug report, and the patch notes were mandatory. The trail recap. Here's the chain we followed. People believed the vibe, unsinkable. Warnings arrived, but attention didn't. Speed stayed high. Damage exceeded design assumptions. Lifeboats existed, but weren't used effectively. Cold water finished what steel began, and the law changed afterward. This isn't a monster story, it's a human system story. The mirror, Titanic is now. Titanic isn't just back then. It's right now. Titanic is every moment we confuse confidence for proof. When a system works 999 times, we assume it will work forever. When experts say it's fine, we stop asking, what if it isn't? When convenience wins, we call it progress, even if safety is losing quietly. Titanic is what happens when a powerful system meets an unbothered mindset. Disaster rarely arrives as a villain. It arrives as a normal day that refuses to stay normal. The lesson that hurts and saves. The Titanic sank in less than 3 hours, but the lesson has taken more than a century to teach. The opposite of unsinkable isn't sinkable. The opposite of unsinkable is honest. Honest about limits, honest about risk, honest enough to slow down when the water whispers, ice. Because the smallest decisions, a message ignored, a speed unchanged, a boat launched half full, can decide who lives. If you want more stories where history exposes the hidden rules of human behavior, subscribe and comment one thing you would change in this chain of decisions, because that's how we learn. We replay the chain until we break it.